colleague and they care about you, they should be your sponsor. They should be telling, you should let them know, you know, at the right time, I'd really like to get a board seat. And so I hope you'll keep me in mind as you're talking to your fellow CEOs and thinking about their board constitution. So I don't know if they're hard, fast. Well, I imagine in public companies there are probably real rules about what you can do and what you can't do. But I do believe that for personal development and the benefit of the company, there's an argument for doing one good board while you're employed.
How long are you expected to be on a board? Is there a term limit? Or is there not a term limit? Is there, how do you?
Big change in that regard.
Really?
It used to be just about lifetime employment. I literally was on the Chucky board about 20 years until we sold the company. But now the trend is almost universal that it's a one-year appointment.
Oh,
So
really?
that's 1 year. But the expectation is that you will spend more than a year because you don't do much useful for the company in 1 year. It's just too much of a learning curve. But so you should be thinking of at least a 3 or 4 year commitment if they want you that long. Now, it can be really short. If, again, you sleep in the meetings, you don't get your material, difficult to get along with or whatever. Some boards have an age limit. This is about the only place in the world where the age is valued. It's a great place. So if there's a retirement age, maybe it'll be 75, maybe even a little later. Again, most boards are on a 1 year term elections.
I had no idea
Yeah.
that it was 1 year.
Yeah, that's a big change. That's a real big change. We used to have staggered boards where these three are nominated now for a 3 year term, then these three, and this. And one of that was to keep shareholders from throwing out the whole board in 1 year and taking up the company. But so now it's a 1 year so that you're at risk. You know, shareholders vote for every board member every year. And we always laugh to see who gets the least votes. And it's usually the people on the compensation committee. I got second to the least at Darling last year, and the lead director got the least. So it's just investors who are mad at the company, for some reason.
So talk a little bit about your committee assignments. I know you've mentioned the compensation committee, maybe governance. What kinds of expectations are there? I mean, you've got all this preparation for the board, and the board meets all these times, but I've got to believe there is also committee work too.
Lots of it.
Okay, talk a little bit about that.
Audit committee has always been considered the hardest and the most prep work, and it's all mostly financial experts, which means you've either been CPA and partner at a firm, or you have overseen a CFO, or you've been a CFO. But like I said, I've been the wild card on all of those just because I was different and showed that they needed a little bit of diverse opinion there. Lots of reading, lots of numbers. I still don't understand all of them, but neither does anybody else. They'll act like they know, but I've asked questions, they go, well, no, actually, I don't know that either. So. Compensation is extremely complicated now. If you read a proxy of a company, that's a educational, boring, but educational experience where you read a proxy and just see what it pays attention to. There's equal discussion about compensation of the top officers. I mean, there's only talking about the top 5 people in the board, as there is about the financials of the company, all the risk factors in that, just because it's so formulaic and it's so about last year's results and the next 2 years' results and short-term incentives and long-term incentives and stock options and stock and bonus. And it's very, very complicated. So I'm still very much on a learning curve on that, as is our whole committees, all of them, because it changes. I'm on the Public Affairs Committee of AAA. That's a little more familiar territory. Enjoy that. We're involved in legislation all over the country to keep roads safer. There's special committees that come up when you have special circumstances. But those are the main standing ones. There can be industry specific, like our Darling company is so commodity driven. We have a group of people who've spent their careers in the commodity world, and they talk about certain things that I don't understand. I don't know about pork underbellies and what they're selling for in Hong Kong. These guys do.
When you talk about exposure, you've talked about M&A. So what is the exposure for board in the headlines now? With the Me Too or with now the academic? And these are CEOs. Now, does the board also have exposure to that?
It depends. If they have done their duty of care and duty of loyalty, they should be fine and protected if they are not the one who is the offending person. And if they've misbehaved and they're the one getting the claims against them, their insurance probably isn't going to work for them very well. And they could be subject to some personal damages, I guess. But yeah, every time there's a new headline about some misbehavior in the corporate world, you think, oh boy, I wonder if this is going on anywhere where I spend time. And kind of think through that.
So, with that said, so outside of M&A, what are there any other exposures?
These litigators are, the ambulance chasing lawyers. They'll sue you for anything. Most companies have lots of lawsuits going on all the time. It's just about, your Pepsi fell off the truck and hit my car, I want $3 million. There's just all sorts of things like that going on. Most of that we don't ever hear about. They're lingering lawsuits. Maybe it's about environmental stuff from a company you bought 20 years ago that hasn't settled yet, and so you've got to have a footnote in your proxy or the annual report about some EPA something. So personal misbehavior or overlooking and knowing about misbehavior would be a reason that a board member would have risk, I think. You can't turn the other way if you know something's going on. We're asked, all these questionnaires we have to fill out every year. Is anybody else doing this? Not just are you doing it, but do you know if anybody else is doing that? Anybody on the board, anybody in management, or any vendors doing this? Does your brother-in-law sell stuff to the company? Crazy.
Yes, Laura.
Have you ever resigned a board position because the values of the company or the culture or the integrity of the board wasn't what you wanted or expected?
You would hope to catch that on the front end.
Yeah, right.
The closest I came to that is, I can talk about Spaghetti Warehouse because it's out of the public arena now. They're in business, but we sold to private equity. Our board got so dysfunctional, we couldn't function. You had the founder and owner for a long time of the company who tried to bring in new management. I was part of the new management's new board people, and we had the sleeping four over here, and then we had the new people over here. And if the founder sticks around, it's really probably not going to be a pretty picture with a new person, because your spaghetti doesn't look as good as my spaghetti. Change Mama's recipe. So it was crazy. We went through 2 CEOs, and they fired a 3rd CEO because they bring somebody in with the promise, please come help the company, come modernize our brand, come do this, come do that. They get there and they go, don't change anything. But yeah, we want those financial results. So we had such disconnect, we couldn't talk the CEO into coming to the company. They had enough sense to see what was going to happen to them. So we sold the company. We sold it to private equity, and they got rid of all the board, got rid of all that nonsense, and then they could go forward. So,
Interesting. Any other questions? I have
On the map.
questions, but we covered them in different responses here. So, oh yes,
I
ma'am.
have a question. I think for someone who's sitting here listening to it and trying to decide, when am I ready, what's the right time, et cetera, I know you've kind of danced around this. I'm trying to figure out how you can best articulate, and I'm sure to some degree this varies, but how to prepare yourself for the commitment of time it will be. Because probably everyone in this room is a go-getter, and there's a reason they're sitting in this room.
right.
And it's almost as though if there are hours to fill them, we'll find ways to fill them.
Yes.
And so you have to go back and figure out, what am I going to trade off
Right.
in terms of taking on something new like a board appointment. And so I'm trying to get a better feel for what time commitment that really does look like and what we should think through in deciding if we're truly ready.
Well, like with everything I said, I think it depends.
Yeah.
But, you know, a mid-market or smaller company might be a great place to start. There are plenty of private companies, as, you know, Kathy was saying. And, you know, look in your circle of relationships and see who you know and who knows you and thinks well of you. That could be an opening there. But, you know, if you didn't have to travel, if it were a local company, that might be helpful. And a lot of, I couldn't have traveled like I'm traveling now when I had kids at home. You know, location, demands, they should be very upfront about calendar planned, you know, what's absolute, what's extra and expected to that. And you have to figure out, you know, when between soccer seasons and Girl Scouts or whatever, you know, how can I clear the way enough to do that? It's not, you know, if you had a super full life already and you decide to take on a big, complicated, multi-day meeting board that met in, you know, somewhere that you can't fly to very easily, that would be crazy. But you probably would view it as another, if you're, I don't know if you're in the consulting world, the corporate world, but you view it as another client, a big, important client. And I'm going to carve out and just know that this is coming. And a nice thing is, it is predictable, most of the work, until something goes wrong. And then it's not predictable. But most of the time you know generally what is going to be expected of you and at what times.
Yes.
Have you ever turned down a board position, and if so, why?
I talked about one earlier that I mentioned that they weren't serious about really wanting any contributions. They just wanted to stand at the table, and they also didn't want to pay very much at all for what they expected. So that was, I turned that one down. I've had a number of inquiries. The more exposure you have in the board world, you know, you're just going to hear about them. And so if you know board members, you should be telling them that you would like to join that club if you're interested in that. And get your name in the hat, because I always refer other people. Now, I can't take on any more right now. I'm as full as I want to be, and unless I dropped one, I wouldn't even think about trying to add another one now. So when I get a call, I do think about it, and it's usually very precise. When they reach out, it's like, okay, we need a chief information officer type person who understands his Asian experience, you know, and done this and done that. So, and we'd like for it to be a woman. I just really try hard to give them good names of people I know that fit those parameters when I get them.
Talk about the pay. Do you negotiate for what you're going to get paid? Do they pay all the board members the same? And I guess you're right, if it's publicly held, you see that.
Yes.
But if it's not publicly held, then do they just tell you what it is and you decide if you want it or not, or is it more of a negotiation like a job?
In my experience, it has been set, and all board members are the same, except a lead director would get a little bit more. A head of an audit committee would get a little bit more. Head of a comp committee would get a little bit more, because they're doing more work, and that's fair. But we do set our own compensation too. But you know, it's in a sphere of reasonableness. You know, what kind of company it is, your peer groups. We're evaluated. All the executive comp is related to peer groups. Who's in your line of business? How big is it? You know, who would you hire from if you had to replace a senior executive and all that? So it's reasonableness. It's studies. And we have compensation consultants that we work with, and anything, yeah. All my boards, we relook at board compensation about every 3 years. We'll have a consultant come in and show us the studies and say, oh, we're being underpaid by 5%, or I don't think we've ever been overpaid. Well, fees have been going up because the work goes up. It's considerably more than it was 5 years ago for any board, just because of the responsibility and the exposure and so forth. But no, it's not something you go. It's, you go and negotiate. It's
Cynthia, can you just mention NACD and the value of being an NACD?
Yes, the National Association of Corporate Directors is a great, great, great organization. You can join it if you're on the board of a nonprofit. Oh, really? And it puts you in the sphere of sitting board members. We have a meeting Tuesday. I've organized it. On cybersecurity oversight for directors, we'll have about 200 people there.
Wow.
And probably 75, 80 sitting directors, and then all the communities that feed on us, you know, the recruiters and Big Four accountings and the consultants and whatever. They sponsor the organization, so they get to come. But if you're on the board of a nonprofit, you can be a member of NACD and come to these meetings. There's also Women Corporate Directors, which is another good organization. I haven't spent as much time on that. It's a big group here in Dallas, but most people seem to find the value in that at the national level. But they have job banks, both of these do. I haven't personally used them. But it's a real good learning place and to get you in that ecosystem of sitting. You're going to sit beside somebody who either wants to be on a board, is trying to fill a board seat, or wants to be hired by a board, or is a board director.
You had a question?
Yes, but you mentioned a little bit earlier about time commitment, so it does sound like this is 40-hour plus work for being on 3 different boards, is that fair?
Well, no, it's not all the time. It's cyclical or seasonal. Like, I don't have any board commitments in June or January, unless it's my year to go on international plant tours for Darling. And then I just lay out the years, and I can see where there are pockets of time. So it's semi-retirement, semi-working, but it's
She
not.
travels a lot. I know this because I see her on Facebook, and she is always somewhere wonderful.
Always somewhere.
Always
Everybody has to
somewhere.
be somewhere, always, yeah. So it's not all out. One of my colleagues on the Darling board, and a number of people who've become professional directors, and they've come up through a corporate career, she is amazing. She sits on 4 boards, and she's a busy lady, because they're all big public companies, and she lives in Florida, and nobody's there. They do get her on the private plane. That's just terrible, but they fly her to Chicago and fly her here and whatever. So it doesn't have to be full-time. One is certainly not.
Any other question? Yes, Sini.
Is ethnic diversity a big, becoming significant to board
Yes.
selection?
Absolutely. Diversity of every kind is very much discussed. And I think now boards are looking at a matrix of, skill sets that we need, our strategy, and so we don't have anybody with international experience, or we have somebody that's about to retire that has strong international experience on one of the boards. But that was one of the reasons they brought in the woman who run Asia for Monsanto. Even age is getting to be discussed more, because younger people can add real value to the group of 70-year-olds sitting around trying to figure out Facebook. You ask them, listen to those questions, oh my God, they're so horrible. It's just like not a clue. Ethnic in every way. Ethnic diverse, excuse me.
Diversity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was pleased to hear you talk a little bit about the nonprofit participation. How many in here are on a nonprofit board, or have been? Almost everyone, exactly. I can attest to the fact that relationships is what gets you on a board, because